Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Today's cancer care virtual seminar topic is Samaritan Local Cancer Research Studies. My name is Carmen Boone. I'm an outreach coordinator for the Samaritan Cancer Research Center, and I'll be your host and moderator. This event is brought to you by the Samaritan Cancer Resource Center. We partner with anyone touched by cancer to provide the support they need to live with strength, determination, and hope into the future. This presentation is being recorded. All microphones are muted and will remain muted during this session. And finally, please use the questions menu to type your questions and comments and at any time. Time will be reserved at the end of the session for questions and answers. Joining us today is Anthony Franklin, Clinical Research Manager from the Samaritan Research and Quality Department. Thank you so much for being here with us today, Tony.
Just a couple things. First of all, my name is Anthony Franklin. I'm a research coordinator turned into the research manager. I've been working at this for now 7 years. Before that, I worked in med-surg and ICU up in North Lincoln Hospital. Really at first didn't know what research was all about as far as what Samaritan was doing, and so this is kind of a great opportunity for me to share that with you, because through that journey I've learned so much, and I've realized how important research really is to improving our care here at Samaritan. And so with that, I want to really focus first on some of the goals that we have here, what motivates us or motivates me to do what I do. First of all, providing excellent treatment options close to home. I think it's critical that we realize that even though Portland is only a couple hours away, that could be the barrier that prevents patients from going on a study that could be very meaningful and important to them. Also, the second one, making available opportunities to participate in research. So that one is less about the patient and more about the future research, maybe for a loved one, maybe for another patient or somebody else that would have that diagnosis. And I do find that that's something that motivates patients probably the most, is really looking to the future. And then the third one is really about us here at Samaritan and really improving the care that we provide. And so that's promoting best practices and quality improvement through research. So letting the data drive us to do better. Thank you. A little more on understanding the different goals of research, because I think it's really important to understand how research is, the motivations, and how sometimes those motivations are very different. So a couple things. We have promoting quality of life. So that's obviously critical in healthcare to improve quality of life. Sometimes research is more focused specifically on decreasing a tumor's growth or slowing a disease process. Sometimes we look at developing new therapies or improved care, detecting diseases, or promoting new products. Obviously, the sponsors are sometimes promoting new products. Now, the reason for the weird graphic as far as the roadway going multiple direction is to show that the direction or motivations of research vary so much. The goal, I should point out, may or may not align with every patient. So that's part of that consenting process. All of the trials I'm going to share with you today involve consenting patients, and that's critical to making sure that those goals align with the patient that we're providing those trials to. So I'm going to start first with looking at a couple trials that we have related to cancer detection and drug development. The first one is a study sponsored by Exact Sciences. This company is interested in cancer detection by liquid biopsy. So this would be a really big win for cancer detection, being able to simply draw somebody's blood and then being able to find out whether they have cancer based off of that blood, or have maybe the beginning of a cancer that we can't detect using other diagnostics like imaging. Even if it doesn't really end up having the promise of detecting cancer 5 years out, it could be a companion study that works alongside imaging and helps verify whether a patient does have cancer. So this is a multinational study. We're just one site of many. They're seeking 4,500 cancer patients. This is prior to treatment, because once a patient has been treated, that sort of changes what their blood looks like. And these are patients with solid tumors as opposed to patients with like leukemia or multiple myeloma. And the study I put in parentheses is also looking at 16,500 healthy subjects. We're not participating in that part of the study, but locally we've enrolled 32 cancer patients from last October to now. The study's been very successful. Patients, like I said earlier, are very motivated to help develop future tests for cancer. And like a lot of patients look at it as maybe this could help their kids who might be at high risk for cancers as well. The second one is a new study. We just opened it. We haven't enrolled anybody, but very similar. It's also looking at biomarkers for diagnosis and treatment development. And this is cancer patients prior to treatment as well. Okay, so this is a sort of a combination study, and I'll kind of go through it. It's a little bit confusing. This is about lung cancer testing and treatment. So this is an example of a study that's funded through the NIH. We belong to what's called a cancer co-op, which is a group that brings us cancer studies that would ordinarily be difficult to have us as be a sort of a standalone site. And so we work with UCSF, or the University of California at San Francisco, and through them we have access to a number of trials that are NIH funded. So the first one that I have there in parentheses is called the Alchemist trial, and the second one is a treatment trial. It doesn't have a great name, so it's stuck with A081801. And in any case, the first trial is really about testing tumors for specific mutations that will guide treatment. So in this case, this is for non-small cell lung cancer patients. And those patients who enroll in that first part of the trial, or the Alchemist trial, are tested for whether they harbor a mutation or not. And depending on whether they harbor that mutation or not, there may be different treatments that are specific to those mutations. In this case, that second part of the trial, the one with the number, is the treatment component. And so that's looking at patients that do not have the EGFR or ALK mutation, and it's looking at how do we treat these patients? What are we going to provide them after surgery? So after surgery, the question is, do we use an immunotherapy with a more traditional chemotherapy, and do we put the two together at the same time, or do we follow it up? And so it's really looking at different treatment patterns of how we do this. Locally, we have 10 patients that have enrolled in that testing component of the trial, and then 5 patients that enrolled to what I said is a predecessor treatment trial. So that's why this is, like I said, a little bit confusing, because before that A081801 trial, there was a different trial that read out, meaning it had results, and it showed that immunotherapy was a good idea to reduce recurrence of non-small cell lung cancer after surgery. And so because of that trial, we moved on to another trial. So then now we're no longer looking at whether we add immunotherapy or not. We're looking at how do we add it. So these trials can sort of evolve through time. Like I said, I've been at it 7 years. This group of trials has probably been going on close to that long, probably 5 or 6 years, if I remember right. We've had it open for a long time. Thanks. Next slide. So the research department is not only involved in what I would call traditional research of treatment, we're also interested in looking at data and seeing how we can improve care through data. or data-driven research locally at our site. So we've worked with the Pulmonology Department to develop a lung cancer screening program. It's still small, and we're looking at growing this, but the need is great. And a couple things I want to show you in this slide is I want you to take a look, and this is at Good Samaritan Regional Medical Center, or our hospital here in Corvallis. And this is 2020 data. I want you to look at the staging data. Now, the staging data is referring to how advanced that cancer is. Stage 1 cancer is just a smaller tumor, isolated at the lungs, and by the time you reach stage 4, that cancer is now spread throughout the body. And you can look at the numbers there. We had 91 cases of non-small cell lung cancer diagnosed here at that hospital in 2020. And you can see how the numbers spread out. You can see that 43, almost half of them were found to be stage 4. Now, if you were to look at breast cancer, you would see almost a flip. You would see that we tend to find breast cancers early, and that means they have a much better prognosis. These late-stage lung cancers do not have a very good prognosis. Stage 3 lung cancers have about 36% or less 5-year survival, meaning not very many patients will make it to 5 years. And by the time you get to stage 4, about 10% or less of those patients will make it to 5 years. So thus the importance of developing this program, and because of our expertise and knowledge of data, we've been able to move forward with this. We now have 39 patients enrolled in our lung cancer screening program. We recognize, though, that there are some 4,000 patients that meet eligibility requirements, and we know this through smoking history that is routinely taken throughout Samaritan. Those patients that are eligible, that's actually grown quite a bit in recent years with the addition of new data from Medicare and the U.S. Task Force. So now it's patients with a 20-pack year smoking history, ages 50 to 77. There's some additional criteria, but those are the main ones. And so that's been really excellent project and something we're looking at developing more and working with that pulmonology department to grow this program so that we can start to flip the script here and start recognizing more early stage lung cancers that have a much better outcome. They're more likely to be treatable through a combination of surgery, radiation, and chemotherapy. Thanks. Next slide. Yeah. This is something different, just looking at quality of life. One of the things in medicine, especially in oncology care, is do no harm. And we know, unfortunately, that chemotherapies and treatments, they can do quite a bit of harm to a patient. So we have to balance that with, when is it appropriate to treat a patient, and how do we treat those patients, especially looking at later stages of treatment. So this study is another NIH study that was brought to us through that group I told you about through UCSF. And this is looking at patients with cancer, solid tumors, who are looking at receiving an immunotherapy like Pembro or Nivolumab, if you've heard of those. And those treatments do have side effects. While they're tolerated fairly well, some of their side effects are pretty serious. They're things like pneumonitis and colitis and other inflammatory diseases that can be life-changing. So this study simply looks at the patient's quality of life while they're getting those therapies. And the reason it's looking at monotherapy and not looking at patients that are receiving a whole suite of chemotherapies is it really wants to isolate the effects of those immunotherapies on those patients. So it's collecting survey data and then blood draws to help prognosticate who may or may not develop adverse events as a result of that. So this is more recently open, so we just have 3 patients enrolled locally. Next slide. And I'm going to kind of switch gears here. I know most of the audience might be more focused on oncology care, but I want to remind you that we do basically research in any and all departments. Depends quite a bit, though, on the interest of the investigators, and I'll share more about that here in a little bit. But this study, this is Adam Brady has really worked on this, and I put SHS here as the sponsor because this is a COVID-19 basic research, or a biobank, where we're providing results to the Oregon Health Authority. And what we're doing here is we're looking at analyzing samples that we have of COVID positive patients, and we're looking at analyzing them for the variant of COVID that those patients have. So you see that large number, 907 patients enrolled locally. That's 907 plus phone calls that were made to patients to ask for consent or permission to test their samples for the variant of COVID that those patients had. This is using those samples that, the nasal samples that were already taken and analyzed. And then we've worked very closely with Oregon State University, who has the capacity to analyze those samples. And the next slide will show you those results. Leave you a little time to look at this. It's a pretty interesting graph. In many ways, it mirrors what we've seen around the country, but this is our data. This is Samaritan's data of looking at our patient population and the variants that they demonstrated of COVID. And so you can see early on we had quite a variety of different variants. And then by the time we got to 2021 of August, it was almost completely dominated by the Delta variant. And that you can see that Delta variant diminishing into 2022 to where it's been 100% Omicron at this point. And I think that's been just excellent that we've been able to report all this data to OHA. Most of the reporting variant analysis is done through at Portland sites, but through work of our coordinators and all those phone calls and with OSU's help, we've been able to get all this data to Oregon Health Authority and provide more data and understanding of this disease, both nationally and locally. This is, I don't know, really very interesting, a little bit mind-blowing to me, not something I was aware of as even a treatment possibility. So this is a sepsis device, and this is sponsored by Xthera and the Department of Defense. You can imagine the Department of Defense has interest in sepsis research, and sepsis is, in this case, is when an infection overwhelms the body, and we're referring not just to sepsis, but to septic shock. So the body is overwhelmed, and a patient will become hypotensive, and mortality is quite high with septic shock. So on the right there, you can see the filter itself. This is a blood filtration system, and I put it similar to dialysis because it actually uses the same machine to take a patient's blood and run it through a filter. And the filter, and I'm going to let the Seraph company or Xthera describe it better than I can. It says the blood vessels are lined with a biological structure called the glycocalyx. It enables the immune system to recognize and selectively attack foreign organisms. So this filter, similar in chemical composition, mimics the glycocalyx to selectively absorb pathogens, which remain in the filter when the blood is returned to the patient. So this wouldn't be ideal for a patient that was doing well with fighting an organism, but you can imagine a patient that's overwhelmed by an organism and has lots of that organism present within their body. A filter like this at least is promising in that it could help treat that patient that's critically ill. We've had 2 patients enrolled locally, and I expect we'll have more patients on this study because of the critical nature of this research. And so I think we're very lucky to have a study like this to be looking at such an important topic. Next slide, please. Okay, going to a different department. Like I said, we're all over the place. This is rheumatology treatment research. So this is 2 studies that are looking at rheumatological disorders. The first one is sponsored by Eli Lilly and is looking at a drug named baricitinib for moderate to severe rheumatoid arthritis. This one in particular is sort of what they call an aftermarket study. So the drug is already approved. They're really looking more closely at safety endpoints, specifically blood clots, because there's concern about this drug causing blood clots. And so they're enrolling patients in the study, and the idea is to really look at them closely to see if they develop any blood clots that would be issues for further expansion of the use of this drug that, while effective, may be causing harm through those blood clots. So they're collecting a lot of data on that. The second one is through Bristol Myers Squibb, BMS, and it's looking at a drug called deucravacitinib versus placebo for psoriatic arthritis patients who have an inadequate response to first-line therapies. So they've seen some traditional therapies, ibuprofen and some other drugs frontline, but they haven't been effective. And really the gold standard as far as looking at if somebody improves with rheumatology is looking at joint swelling and pain. They also, the reason I put the radiograph there in the corner is to show you that this study also uses X-ray evidence to show that there's improvement, because it's important to have some very objective criteria. Pain is, of course, can be fairly subjective. While it's very important to ask patients, their pain level, it's also important to look at X-rays and see if there's evidence of deformities. And that study just opened recently. I'll end with a couple cardiology studies. This is what's kept us busy lately. This first one, this is a new treatment looking at inclisiran versus placebo. A little bit similar to the baricitinib trial in that this drug is already approved. The problem with that approval is that it's approved in that it helps lower LDLs or cholesterol, but it hasn't been initially shown to decrease cardiac events. And so we look at the idea of, yes, we want to lower our cholesterol, but ultimately the goal is to decrease cardiac events, and it's much harder to prove that. And so this company, Novartis, is very interested in they think that, yes, indeed, by including this drug that they can decrease cardiac events, but that's still to be proven, and that's why we're enrolling patients in this study. And so, like I said, this is just recently opened, and we have 2 patients enrolled, and this will be a long-term study. I think the patients were maybe a little bit floored by the fact that they might be involved in this study for up to 6 years. And that's because some of the research like this has really long-term outcomes, so we have to be able to support research like this for the long-term outcomes. But these long-term outcomes are very important, certainly when we're looking at heart attacks and strokes. Second study, a little bit different. This is Milestone. They're looking at a drug that I like to think of it kind of like nitroglycerin, something that decreases chest pain, except in this case, the reason I liken it to nitro is because it's fast acting. So essentially what they've done is they've taken a drug that has already been developed, calcium channel blocker. In this case, they're using one called etripamil, and they've put it in a nasal spray formulation. And that's what's really unique, is that nasal spray formulation, because with that nasal spray formulation, it allows the patient to get the drug much sooner than it would if it was oral. And why that's critical is patients that come in with PSVT or paroxysmal supraventricular tachycardia, they come in to the ED very uncomfortable. I mean, they're basically running a race, heartbeat could be in the 180s, and they're doing that at rest. So very uncomfortable, and they might require cardioversion or very immediate therapies that are not very comfortable. And so if they were able to treat this condition at home, that would be a big win if we could come up with a treatment that would work and be fast acting. So a very important study, and you can see the cardiograph basically showing that this patient has converted out of SVT to a much slower or sustainable rhythm. This is a disease that affects younger patients, so has interest there as well. And I think that's the last study I wanted to share with you. This has just been a sample of the studies we have. We have probably 3 times this many studies. But I just wanted to highlight more recently enrolling studies and ones that I thought were of interest to everybody. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tony. Now we will give our participants a few moments to write any questions and comments in the questions menu. And while our participants are entering their questions, we'll go over some contact information and upcoming events. If you'd like to obtain more information or resources about cancer, feel free to contact the Cancer Resource Center by phone, email, or visit our website or social media. If you are interested in upcoming events, please contact us to subscribe to our Cancer Resource Center newsletter. And if you're interested in joining an upcoming cancer care virtual seminar, email us or call us. These are what we have coming up. A Spanish one about foods associated with cancer development, how obesity and gut health impact cancer risk, and skin safety and skin cancer prevention. And now, let's go over the audience questions. And if there's any question left unanswered, we will answer the remaining of your questions via email, and we appreciate your patience. So let's see. We have one question from Barb. What is the best way to find out if there is a possible study available for a patient?
Yeah, thank you, Barb, for that question. So we have all these studies available on our website, and you can simply go to the patient tab and go to the clinical research. You have to go down to where it says clinical research trials, and you can look at where you can, it'll have a list of those currently enrolling trials and some contact numbers, and then you can reach out to us or myself. I'm always available there, and those are our phone numbers so that we can be reached directly to help with patients that are interested in enrolling in those clinical trials that they have met some of those inclusion criteria. So thanks for that question.
Thanks so much to our participants. And if you have any questions for Tony that you would prefer to be answered privately, please email us at the Cancer Resource Center at samhealth.org, and we'll make sure to handle your questions. So now, please, once the webinar is over, there's a survey that will pop up. So please fill in the survey that will open after the webinar has concluded. And thanks to our speaker for sharing their time and knowledge with us. Thank you so much, Tony. And finally,
thank you.
Thanks to all of you for participating today. You may now disconnect and have a great